The heavy rosewood doors slammed shut behind me with a dull thud. This was the main study on the third floor of the Vance family mansion, and the air reeked of aged cigars and cold calculation. Julian Vance sat in a wide leather high-backed chair, a lit Cuban cigar pinched between his fingers. His gaze as cold as if he were looking at a dust-covered piece of broken furniture. Standing beside him was Chloe Vance in a champagne haute couture gown. My stepsister Chloe looked at me with the disdain of a victor, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. "Sign this, Evelyn." Julian tossed a thick paper document onto the redwood desk. The pages slid and stopped in front of me. The title read plainly, "Unconditional Renunciation of Family Trust and Corporate Equity." I stood in the center of the room, my spine straight, saying nothing, simply watching him. "Don't look at me with that dead-eyed stare," Julian sneered, exhaling a cloud of white smoke. "Do you still think you're the exalted Mrs. Vance? Those so-called shares your mother left you have long since been cleaned up legally by me. Sign this and you'll get $3,000 a month for living expenses. Don't sign, and you won't even be able to leave this door." Chloe took 2 steps forward. The click of her stiletto heels sounded unbearably sharp in the quiet study. She extended a slender finger, reached into her designer handbag, and produced an exquisite white porcelain pill bottle. In front of me she opened it and poured white capsules one by one into the vase on the desk. "Sis, I know you need these to keep your nerves steady." Chloe's voice was sanctimonious and cloying, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Too bad, Dr. Evans has already issued a diagnosis confirming you have severe paranoid personality disorder. A mentally ill person has no legal capacity. You forged the medical report." My voice was calm and clear, without any emotional fluctuation. "Forged?" Julian scoffed, producing another stack of documents stamped with red seals from a drawer. "In the local judicial system, if I declare it true, it's true. Evelyn, you've sat in the position of Mrs. Vance for far too long. In 2 days is the family's annual charity gala. I've sent invitations to 500 top socialites in the city." He rose and walked slowly to me, looking down at me from above, his eyes filled with cruel mockery. "At the event, I'll arrange a special segment. I'll put you on the stage, announce your mental condition to everyone, and then auction off your guardianship and any remaining rights. Starting bid $1. I want everyone to see what's become of the once noble eldest daughter of a great family." Chloe couldn't help a girlish laugh. She stepped to the desk, reached for the handbag I always carried, and drew out the original share certificate my mother had left aged. Its edges yellowed. "Is this the paper that's kept you going until now?" Chloe raised an eyebrow and tore it in two with both hands. "Rip!" The sound of the paper tearing rent the air. She scattered the shreds at my feet and even raised a heel to stomp on them several times. "Who gave you the nerve to act so high-minded in front of me?" Chloe murmured in my ear. "The night after tomorrow the gala will be your funeral." Julian gestured, and 2 burly men in black immediately stepped in from the doorway, one on each side, seizing my arms and forcibly escorting me out of the study. The guards yanked my arms so hard it felt like they were being torn off, but I didn't struggle or let out a single scream. I simply let them shove me backward, just as they pushed me past the edge of the desk. My right hand, concealed by my loose sleeve, swept along the lower edge of the mahogany table at lightning speed. A miniature audio transmitter, no bigger than a button and coated with specially formulated high-adhesive magnetic glue, stuck precisely to a deep crevice in the wood under Julian's desk. "Take her to the basement and lock her up until the banquet starts." Julian turned around, refilled his whiskey glass, and didn't even glance back. The heavy door slammed shut again, sealing off the laughter and chatter inside. Pushed along the dim corridor, I lowered my eyes and glanced at the floor. They thought they had torn up the only piece of evidence, unaware that it was merely a replacement I had photocopied 3 years ago. And now, the transmitter I had placed under the desk was already streaming the latest conversation from the study in real time to my hidden cloud server. In the upscale consultation room on the top floor of St. Jude Private Hospital, the air was thick with the pungent smell of disinfectant. I was restrained in the examination chair by 2 bodyguards, facing Dr. Evans, who stood before me in a white coat. He wore frameless glasses, his expression cold. Holding a syringe filled with a high-concentration neuroblocker containing a clear liquid. "Mrs. Evelyn, please cooperate," Dr. Evans said as he adjusted the needle, expelling a small stream of the liquid, his tone flat. "Mr. Julian has instructed that to ensure your mental state is sufficiently cooperative for the day after tomorrow's banquet, the first phase of the sedative injection must be completed today." Dr. Evans. Accepting a bribe of $3 million and forging a severe mental illness diagnosis is enough to land you in federal prison for 20 years, I said, meeting his gaze, my voice devoid of emotion. Dr. Evans paused in his movements, sneering coldly. "In this city, the rules of the police and courts are set by the Vance family. No one will listen to your accusations." He raised his hand, signaling the bodyguards to tighten their grip on my shoulders, the sharp needle heading straight for the skin of my arm. Bang! The heavy explosion-proof door of the consultation room was forcibly slammed open. My chief legal counsel, Mark, strode in with 3 senior inspectors from the health department dressed in black uniforms and 2 armed federal marshals. The marshals instantly drew their weapons, targeting the 2 bodyguards, who immediately raised their hands and retreated to the corner. "Dr. Evans, I am Mark, assistant to the special circuit prosecutor of the High Court," Mark said, slapping a seizure warrant stamped with a red seal onto the examination table. "We have received a report that you are suspected of illegally possessing and improperly using controlled neurotoxins. Please put down the syringe immediately and cooperate with the investigation." Dr. Evans's face changed drastically, and the syringe in his hand dropped to the floor, shattering into pieces. How could you possibly obtain an emergency seizure warrant from the health department?" Dr. Evans's voice trembled. I stood up, smoothed out the slightly wrinkled sleeves of my blouse, and pulled a DNA identification report stamped with the official seal of the National Gene Bank from the briefcase Mark handed me, slapping it heavily on the table in front of Dr. Evans. Julian and Chloe always thought that tearing up all the documents at the old mansion would completely strip me of my inheritance rights, I said, looking at the doctor, whose face had turned ashen. But they didn't know that 3 years ago, I already obtained the DNA comparison sample between Chloe and the old patriarch of the Vance family. Dr. Evans eagerly flipped open the report, and when his eyes landed on the final line concluding no blood relation, his pupils constricted violently. "Chloe is not a blood descendant of the Vance family at all. She's just an illegitimate daughter from a collateral branch trying to seize assets," I said, leaning closer to Dr. Evans, my voice low and penetrating. "And Julian, to support her, privately signed the group's equity transfer agreement, which is suspected of massive fraud. As an accomplice to the main perpetrator, you will not only lose your medical license, but all your overseas accounts will be frozen within half an hour." Dr. Evans trembled like a leaf, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He dropped to his knees with a thud, gripping the edge of the examination table, his voice hoarse. "No, it wasn't me. It was Julian. He threatened my family's safety. He gave me a direct order. If you want to negotiate a plea deal, show some sincerity." Mark reminded him coldly from the side. Dr. Evans nodded frantically, pointing at the computer screen and shouting, "I confess. I'll tell you everything. At the charity gala 2 days from now, Julian wasn't just planning to auction off your custody, prepared an excessive dose of hallucinogens beforehand, intending to use your hands to attack the dignitaries on site. Then, under the guise of self-defense, he'd have the security personnel directly have me shot dead." "Right," I cut him off, my expression icy. Dr. Evans collapsed to the floor, utterly speechless. I turned and walked to the clinic's safe, nimbly inputting an 8-digit code that Julian believed only he knew. The safe door swung open, and inside lay an original copy of an overseas betting agreement stamped with the Vance Group's seal. With this contract, combined with Chloe's falsified background report, all of Julian's schemes to destroy me at the gala would become lethal daggers aimed at himself. I tucked the documents into my briefcase, looking down at the disheveled doctor on the floor. Dr. Evans, the night after tomorrow. Continue reporting your diagnosis as Julian planned. If you stray even a single word, 30 years in prison will be your end. With that, I strode out of the clinic with Mark and the law enforcement officers. Inside the top private couture salon on Rodeo Drive, the air was filled with expensive rose perfume and the rich aroma of black coffee. I sat on the sofa, and on the standing garment rack before me hung a deep burgundy silk evening gown. The cut was sharp, the lines flowing. This was the dress I had reserved a month ago for the charity gala. Ding dong, the salon's crystal beaded curtain was flung open roughly, producing a crisp clack. Chloe strode in on 10-centimeter heels, trailed by 4 heiresses who frequently appeared on social media. They were gaudily dressed, arrogant, and filed in as if they owned the place. Oh my, isn't this our former Mrs. Vance? Chloe halted in front of me, looking down with contempt and an unabashed sneer at the corner of her mouth. What happened? Julian kicked you out of the old house and you still have the nerve to come here to pick a dress. Do you even have enough in your account to cover the deposit here? The wealthy girls at her side quickly chimed in with sharp, mocking laughter. Chloe, don't be like that. What if she used her last bit of savings for appearances? One blonde rolled her eyes, disdain written all over her face. But even if she dresses up pretty, won't she be abandoned again in 2 days? I didn't speak or even lift my head to look at them. I simply picked up the bone china coffee cup on the table and took a measured sip. My silence made Chloe feel slighted. Her expression darkened instantly. She strode over to the burgundy evening gown, ran her hand over the fabric, then revealed a vicious smile. This dress is quite pretty, pity you don't deserve to wear it. Before the words finished, Chloe suddenly grabbed a pair of sharp tailor's scissors from the cutting table. Amid gasps from the onlookers, she raised her hand and began frantically shearing at the burgundy dress. Rip, tear. The expensive silk turned into shreds under the scissors, scattering in torn fragments across the floor. Oh, sorry. Slipped. Chloe tossed down the scissors and stamped on the ruined fabric with her heel, grinding it fiercely as she glared at me. Evelyn, wear this heap of trash to the gala in 2 days. I want to see. In front of 500 distinguished guests, when Julian auctions you off naked, whether you still have the composure you do now. The wealthy girls whipped out their phones, shamelessly taking photos and videos of me, ready to post them into their social circles for further humiliation. I put down the cup and rose slowly. My face showed no anger, not even my eyes flickered. I walked past the brazen Chloe and looked toward Madame Clara, the salon owner, who was emerging from the inner room. On the surface, Madame Clara was a renowned top fashion designer, but very few in the city knew that the salon's largest behind-the-scenes stakeholder was actually me. Madame Clara's eyes met mine for the briefest moment. Then she instantly adopted a flustered, helpless expression and stepped toward Chloe, bowing. Miss Chloe, you have destroyed a garment reserved by another client. This how much? I'll pay double. Chloe flung a black card and slapped it down in Madame Clara's face. Also, bring me your most expensive, most eye-catching signature gown. At the gala the day after tomorrow, I will be the absolute star of the evening. Of course. The shop just happens to have a top-secret showcase piece that just arrived from Paris. Madame Clara bent to pick up a black card, turned and walked into the inner room, and soon presented a golden mermaid gown studded with diamonds that glittered under the lights. The dress was the height of luxury, covered in thousands upon thousands of micro rhinestones that sparkled dazzlingly under the spotlights. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. This is befitting of Sister Chloe's status, the rich girls nearby exclaimed. Greed and smug satisfaction flashed across Chloe's eyes. She snatched the dress and sneered. I'll take this. Evelyn, stay here with your junk. She and her entourage pushed the door and left in extreme arrogance. The salon fell quiet again. Madame Clara came to my side, bowed her head respectfully and said, "Boss, it's been done as you instructed. The brooch position on that gold dress is fitted with the latest nanoscale high-precision camera and an omnidirectional acoustic sensor. As long as she wears it, every person she touches and every word she speaks will be transmitted in real time, without blind spots, via encrypted signals to our cloud server." Good. I looked at the scraps of cloth on the floor and said coldly, "She likes to stand under the spotlight in the night after tomorrow. I'll have her exposed in front of tens of millions. Boss, the dress for your banquet has already been prepared." Madame Clara opened another safe, revealing a black haute couture gown with subtle patterns understated but radiating absolute dominance. I took the dress, my gaze icy, in the top-grade vault 3 levels below First Capital Swiss Bank. The climate control system emitted a faint, rhythmic hum. This place had the city's most stringent security defenses. An absolutely private space enclosed by half-meter-thick titanium alloy walls. The several-ton blast-proof metal door slowly opened. Vance Group's CFO Carter, flanked by 2 private bodyguards, was moving boxes of documents and asset transfer authorizations into safety deposit boxes deeper inside the vault. "Hurry up. Finish all these offshore transfer procedures for the trust funds." Carter kept checking his watch, wiping the cold sweat from his brow. His voice urgent. "Mr. Julian instructed that all of Mrs. Evelyn's personal trust assets must be emptied tonight before midnight and transferred into offshore accounts. Director Carter, are you looking for these?" My voice rang out abruptly in the quiet vault corridor. Carter flinched and spun around. I stepped out of the dim corridor in a sleek black suit. Behind me stood a senior commissioner from the Federal Financial Audit Bureau, the bank's chief executive officer, and 4 armed marshals. "Evelyn, how are you here?" Carter's face changed dramatically. The folder in his hand fell with a clatter, scattering page after page of asset transfer applications. "Guards! Where are my guards? Get her out of here." The 2 bodyguards reached for their guns, but the marshals had already moved with lightning speed, pressing cold muzzles against their temples. The bodyguards stiffened, sensibly raised their hands, and were immediately detained. "Director Carter, First Capital Bank's top executive is present here." I walked to the metal table, tapped the cold surface lightly with my fingers, my gaze as sharp as a drawn blade. "Without my personal iris and biometric authentication, any attempt to transfer my personal trust assets legally constitutes major financial fraud." The bank CEO stepped forward, extremely solemn, and presented a freeze order. "Mr. Carter, we have just received an urgent notice from the Financial Audit Bureau. Vance Group is suspected of embezzling public funds and massive money laundering. From now on, all accounts you have handled are fully frozen." "No, this can't be. Mr. Julian already pulled strings at the top." Carter collapsed back into his chair, eyes blank, muttering incessantly. "The connections he pulled were nothing more than the trap I set for you 3 years ago." I drew a thick stack of audit reports from my briefcase and slammed them down in front of Carter. "Over the past 5 years, you helped Julian hide taxes and evade taxes amounting to $720 million, laundering money hundreds of times through offshore shell companies. Every single one of those accounts bears your signature." Carter's pupils contracted violently. His face went ashen. He trembled as he flipped through the reports, the figures and timestamps precise to the point of outrage. Under federal law, these charges alone are enough to spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison. I leaned in slightly, staring into his eyes, my voice calm but carrying an unmistakable, uncompromising authority. "But if you choose to become a cooperating witness for the prosecution and hand over Julian's core blacklist of illicit funds, I can guarantee your family will be spared overseas." Silence spread through the vault, the air so thick it seemed to drip. Every second of waiting was an unbearable torment for Carter. A few minutes later, Carter completely broke down. He covered his face with both hands and let out a despairing sob. I'll hand it over. I'll give it all. Carter trembled as he pulled a miniature encrypted flash drive from his tie clip and pushed it toward me. His voice hoarse beyond recognition. This is everything Julian has recorded over the years. Not only his money laundering records, but also the scandals and vulnerabilities of those 500 political and business elites at the dinner he secretly collected to control the social circle. I reached out and took the cold flash drive, clutching it tightly in my palm. It was not just evidence of crimes. In 2 days at that dinner, it would be the absolute trump card capable of overturning the city's entire set of rules. Take him away. Process him according to legal procedure, I ordered coldly. The marshal escorted the dejected, broken-spirited Carter out of the vault. I stood in the center of the titanium vault and inserted the flash drive into the encrypted terminal. The screen quickly filled with dense streams of data and lists. 100-meter red carpet stretched from the luxurious, lighted arch all the way to the center of the reception hall in front of the Royal Banquet Hall at the top floor of the Grand Hyatt. Tonight was the Vance family's annual charity gala. Giant crystal chandeliers cast dreamlike rings of light. The air was heavy with the decadent blend of top-tier perfume, chilled champagne, and expensive cigars. The city's 500 top political and business tycoons, financial magnates, and socialites flowed through the room in a parade of fragrances and silk, laughter and chatter. The core power nexus of high society reached its peak at this moment. At the hall entrance, Julian Vance wore a bespoke, hand-tailored midnight blue tailcoat, his hair immaculately styled. He had one arm linked with Chloe, who wore a gold, diamond-embellished fishtail gown, and he was beaming as he accepted congratulations from financial reporters and political dignitaries. Chloe dazzled tonight. The gown, pieced together from tens of thousands of micro-rhinestones, flashed a blinding radiance under the spotlights, instantly making her the absolute center of attention. She smiled and chatted warmly with several senators' wives, every gesture and movement radiating the arrogance and pride of a woman about to assume the mantle of the Vance household's mistress. Look, Mr. Julian and Miss Chloe really are a match made in heaven. I heard Julian's going to announce a major family equity reorganization tonight. That's right, didn't the previous Mrs. Vance go mad and get locked away ages ago? Whispers of the elite rippled low through the air. At that moment, the heavy carved rosewood doors of the banquet hall were slowly pushed open by a waiter. The once noisy hall quieted for a second. All the cameras and gazes turned toward the entrance almost simultaneously. I was wearing an extremely simple black patterned couture evening gown, with no flashy jewelry, only a vintage, cold silver brooch fastened at the neckline. My hair was swept into a neat high chignon. I walked into the reception hall in black 7-centimeter stiletto heels, my steps composed and steady, no dishevelment, no exhaustion, and none of the rumored madness or loss of control. My appearance froze the smile on Julian's face. His pupils contracted sharply. A look of incredulous fury and panic flashed in his eyes. Chloe's expression darkened dramatically. She instinctively clenched her hands so hard her nails almost dug into her palms. Evelyn. Julian strode forward several steps and stood before me, his voice lowered to an icy roar that only the two of us could hear. Why are you here? What are Dr. Evans and the bodyguards doing? Who allowed you to come in? I looked at him quietly, my gaze like the still, deep water of an ancient well without a trace of fear, not even a flicker of anger. This is a Vance family event, I said with a smile. My voice was soft but clear enough that a few nearby socialites could hear me distinctly. As the longest-serving compliance director and your lawful wife in terms of Vance Group shareholding, why can't I attend? You lunatic. Chloe rushed forward in her high heels. Her face, carefully made up, contorted slightly with jealousy. She pointed at my nose and shouted at the top of her lungs. Everyone look. This is my sister who suffers from severe paranoid disorder. She's been issued compulsory treatment by the hospital, and she snuck out tonight to disrupt the gala. The assembled elites immediately stirred. They took half a step back, regarding me with the curious, appraising eyes reserved for mad women and outcasts, and whispers surged like a tide. Julian quickly regained his composure, a cruel, amused sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. He lifted his hand, and 4 burly security guards in black immediately closed in from both sides of the reception corridor, boxing me in the center. "Since you're so keen to attend tonight's banquet, this works out perfectly." Julian leaned toward my ear and hissed in a venomous tone only I could hear. "Saves me the trouble of sending people to drag you here from the hospital. Tonight's special auction segment will be far more thrilling with the female lead present in person." He turned to the guards and issued cold orders. "Search her. Confiscate all her communication devices and anything dangerous. Then take good care of her. Escort my dear wife to the VIP holding area until the auction starts." The 4 guards stepped forward, roughly snatching my handbag and seizing the hidden phone on me on the spot. Chloe watched as I was shoved toward the VIP partition with an expression of utter arrogance and fanatic glee. She straightened her gold gown, hooked her arm through Julian's, and turned proudly to mingle with the other guests. But they didn't notice at the chaotic moment when 2 guards were rifling through my bag. My body tilted imperceptibly a half-inch to the left. My right hand, moving at an exquisitely practiced angle, slid the encrypted flash drive I'd taken from the bank vault soundlessly into the bottom of a tray held by a passing male waiter. The waiter caught the flash drive, moved deftly through the noisy crowd, and headed straight for the heart of the reception hall where the city's most powerful and globally connected financial magnate sat. Eric Howard. Eric Howard reclined on a high-backed sofa, his gaze as sharp as an eagle's. The waiter respectfully handed him the encrypted envelope containing the flash drive and murmured something into his ear. The veteran judge and head of the financial empire, Eric Howard, slowly opened the envelope. When he saw the absolute core secrets laid out inside regarding his family's rivals and several high-ranking officials, his eyebrows twitched violently. Through the cold one-way glass of the VIP partition, I watched Eric Howard from afar. Eric Howard slowly lifted his head, his gaze sweeping over the bustling guests and landing precisely on me inside the partition. He raised the whiskey glass in his hand with a finger adorned by a black opal ring, giving me a profoundly enigmatic look. In the unimaginably luxurious Royal Main Banquet Hall, a gigantic crystal chandelier cast dazzling light. 500 political and business elites in finery sat at dozens of round tables draped with satin, glasses clinking, whispering softly. On the central main stage at the front of the hall, an exquisite auction podium had already been set up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian stood center stage, microphone in hand, a flawless PR smile on his face. "Thank you all for attending the Vance family's charity gala tonight. In addition to the traditional art auction, I have prepared a very special indeed, ancien lifetime special lot for you." Before he finished, 2 black-clad bodyguards shoved me up onto the stage. I was wearing that simple black brocade haute couture gown. My back remained perfectly straight as I stood quietly in the center of the podium. The spotlight's glare hit me instantly, stinging my eyes. A ripple of commotion and whispered chatter rose from the 500 guests below. Chloe, seated in the front row of the VIP section, lifted her chin slightly. Pride and malice nearly oozed from her face. She sipped champagne with slender fingers and looked at me with utter contempt, as if staring at a lamb trapped for slaughter. "You all probably know the woman standing beside me was once my wife, Evelyn." Julian's tone suddenly turned unbearably mournful, but his eyes flashed with cold cruelty. "Regrettably, after diagnosis by authoritative medical institutions, Evelyn suffers from an irreversible severe mental disorder and has even shown violent tendencies within the family multiple times. As a socially responsible entrepreneur, I can no longer continue this marriage. But I cannot allow a mentally ill person to wander the streets." He came to my side, slapped my shoulder hard, then grabbed my wrist and displayed my hand to the 500 guests like merchandise, his voice full of mockery and humiliation. "In the name of humanity, and to raise even the smallest sum for tonight's charity fund, I have decided to publicly auction off all of Evelyn's remaining personal contractual rights and custodial care tonight. Opening bid $1. Ha ha ha." As soon as Julian finished, Chloe was the first to let out a sharp laugh. Immediately, representatives of the minor consortia aligned with the Vance family and some socialites burst into waves of laughter and unrestrained derision. $1. That's too expensive. Are we buying a crazy woman to feed at home? Yeah. I heard her family shares were wiped out now she's a worthless nobody. Julian has such a sense of humor. Auctioning off this kicked-out useless wife. Absurd. Grating mockery echoed through the vast banquet hall in relentless waves. Julian stood beside me, his smirk growing more brazen. He leaned close and whispered in a voice only the two of us could hear, dripping with scorn. Do you hear that, Evelyn? That's your value. Trash nobody will even pay $1 for. After tonight, the whole city will know you're the crazy woman auctioned for $1. Didn't even think about getting back up in this life. I stood motionless in the spotlight, expressionless, my gaze like an icebound abyss. Even my lashes did not tremble. I merely scanned the jeering crowd, committing every ugly face to memory, just as Julian was about to raise the auction gavel and, in the most humiliating way, bring this farce to a close $5 million. A cold, steady voice, laden with unparalleled authority, suddenly thundered out from the VIP seats at the front of the banquet hall. The voice wasn't loud, yet it contained a suffocating absolute control that instantly cut off all the laughter and noise. The entire hall fell deathly silent. Smiles froze on everyone's faces as they all turned in unison toward the source of the voice. Julian's hand holding the gavel froze midair. The vicious grin on his face vanished without a trace, replaced by utter shock and disbelief. Chloe, seated in the first row, trembled and sent champagne from her goblet splashing onto her expensive golden gown. But she didn't even bother to wipe it. Her eyes were wide and her face was the picture of stunned horror. On the most central seat of the banquet hall, a tall, imposing man slowly rose. He wore a finely textured dark gray bespoke suit. His deep features were laid bare under the lights, and his hawk-like eyes radiated a chilling authority and coldness. It was Alexander Ross, the city's largest dark capital magnate. The puppet master controlling Europe's 3 top investment banks and the world's largest distressed asset disposal group. Alexander Ross, an absolute emperor of capital before whom even the late Vance patriarch would have backed away, fearful to the point of avoidance. $5 million. Julian's voice completely changed pitch. His throat seemed stuck as he swallowed hard. Mr. Ross, you're joking, right? This woman is just a $10 million. Alexander didn't look at Julian. He raised his hand again and announced an even more staggering figure. His voice was devoid of emotion, as if he were saying a few spare dollars instead of 10 million. A collective intake of breath swept the hall. Everyone's scalps tingled. Some even wondered if their ears had deceived them. Alexander strode forward, and under the gaze of hundreds of utterly astonished eyes, climbed onto the main stage step by step and walked straight to my side. He was so tall that he stood like an insurmountable mountain, drawing all the spotlights and attention. Mr. Ross, this is against the rules. Julian panicked, cold sweat beading all over his forehead as he stammered. She's my wife, and she's a mentally ill abandoned woman. You can't first. As of 5 minutes ago, she is no longer your wife. Alexander turned his head and looked down at Julian coldly. The chill in his eyes made Julian involuntarily step back half a pace. Then, in front of 500 guests, Alexander took a thick file from his assistant and personally handed it to me. Second, these are the complete debt transfer documents from Vance Group's 3 largest creditor banks to me, and the Global Supply Chain Default Recovery Agreement for Vance Group. Alexander's voice projected through the microphone and echoed throughout the banquet hall. I have transferred these debts and the group's absolute control, all without compensation, to Ms. Evelyn. Alexander looked at me, the corner of his mouth lifting in an icy yet very respectful arc. Now, Ms. Evelyn is the biggest creditor of the Vance Group and the absolute controller holding 51 of the group's preferred shares. And you, Julian Vance, are nothing but a dog of defeat, heavily in debt, about to face bankruptcy, liquidation, and judicial trial. Boom. The air on the main stage seemed to freeze instantly. Julian's eyes were bloodshot, his chest heaving violently. As he sank into a state of almost manic fury, he glared at Alexander standing beside me, then turned to look at me, his face shifting from pale to green. Veins bulging at his temples. Fake documents. These are absolutely fake documents. Julian suddenly roared hysterically, snatching the microphone and shouting frantically at the dozens of black-clad security personnel below the stage. Security, what are you waiting for? Arrest these 2 criminals who have broken into the banquet and forged business documents. Throw them out. A dozen well-trained black-clad bodyguards immediately drew their batons and, with menacing expressions, surrounded the stage. The 500 elite guests erupted into chaos, with screams and shrieks rising and falling. Chloe, seated in the first row, had a twisted expression and yelled, "That's right. Arrest this bitch and the random man she brought. They're extorting us," facing the advancing bodyguards. Alexander didn't even furrow his brow. He merely shifted slightly, shielding me behind him, his eyes as cold as an ancient, frozen polar sea. "Julian, do you really think this banquet hall is still your territory?" I spoke over Alexander's shoulder, my voice clear and icy, carrying across the entire stage. As the words left my mouth, I raised my left hand and pressed the miniature wireless trigger hidden behind the vintage brooch. Beep! A sharp, crisp sound instantly blasted through the banquet hall's top-tier sound system. The next second, dozens of massive 8K Ultra HD LED screens, which had been playing the Vance family corporate promotional video, flickered across the entire screen. Then, the signal was forcibly cut, replaced by a black control interface. What's going on? What is the control room doing? Julian looked up in panic at the VIP control room on the second floor. At that moment, standing before the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the control room, my elite cybersecurity team gave me a thumbs up. The control room had long been completely taken over by us. SHOM, the screen image suddenly shifted. The first image was nothing less than the real-time surveillance footage from the high-end salon in Chapter 3. On the screen, Chloe, wearing that glamorous golden fishtail dress, her face twisted and vicious, was using scissors to destroy my gown, screaming, "Evelyn, at the banquet in 2 days, you can wear these rags. I want to see if you'll still be this calm when Julian auctions you off naked in front of 500 guests." The entire venue fell into dead silence. All the guests stared in shock at Chloe's wanton and venomous display on the giant screen. Chloe's face instantly turned paler than paper. She covered her mouth in terror, her whole body trembling violently. Before anyone could recover from the shock, the screen image shifted again, playing a crystal-clear audio and video recording the secret recording from the study of the old mansion in Chapter 1. Julian's cold, ruthless voice exploded clearly across the banquet hall. "In the local judicial system, if I say it's real, it's real, Evelyn. You've been occupying the title of Mrs. Vance for far too long. I will push you onto the stage, announce to everyone your mental condition, and then sell off your custody and all remaining rights publicly. Starting bid $1. In the next flash, the screen showed the complete ledgers and evidence of tax evasion and money laundering from Chapter 4, stored by CFO Carter in the Swiss bank vault. Hundreds of millions in black money transaction details, forged financial statements, cash flows from offshore shell companies frame by frame, page by page were presented in meticulous detail to the 500 guests. My God, this is massive money laundering. Julian actually plotted against his own wife and even faked a psychiatric report. This is outright intentional crime. The 500 political and business elites in the audience completely erupted. All the elegance and pretense vanished in that instant. The waves of denunciation and shock nearly overturned the entire banquet hall. But that wasn't the most lethal part. As the big screen played these pieces of evidence, a red live broadcast icon suddenly appeared in the upper right corner of the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, I walked to the center of the stage, coldly looking at the grief-stricken Julian and Chloe, my voice carrying across the hall. 3 minutes ago, this footage started streaming live across the web simultaneously through the world's 20 largest financial media platforms. At this very moment, over 20 million viewers worldwide are watching the Vance Group president's spectacular performance in real time. No, turn it off. Turn it off. Julian went completely mad. Like a rabid beast, he lunged toward the equipment console beside the stage, trying to pull the power cord. But Alexander's two top bodyguards moved like lightning. With a single neat shoulder throw, they slammed Julian hard onto the floor, pinning him so he couldn't move an inch. At that moment, the image on the big screen flipped again, this time. What popped up was the Black Money client list and secret files that Carter had handed over in the vault. Those politicians and tycoons who had been sitting below watching the spectacular, even mocking me moments earlier, saw their own names and some unsavory secret transaction codes flash across the screen. Their faces changed instantly, cold sweat pouring down. Damn it. We can't let this keep playing. Run. Get out of here. The banquet hall plunged into unprecedented, utter chaos. The VIPs scrambled to their feet, shoving and screaming as they tried to flee. Socialites' jewelry tumbled to the floor, wine glasses shattered, and the once luxurious, noble charity dinner was in an instant reduced to a carnage, stripping away any veneer of hypocrisy. Chloe collapsed at the edge of the stage, staring at the camera and the crowd's contemptuous, disgusted faces, screaming in despair and desperately covering her face with both hands. Julian was held down on the floor, his cheek pressed against the cold tiles, eyes wide, staring fixedly at the tens of millions watching online rising on the big screen and at the group's plunging share price. He finally understood that the banquet he had meticulously arranged to bury me had become his and Chloe's public guillotine. I looked down at the mortified Julian from above. My gaze cold as ice. Julian, this is only the first step, I said softly. In the VIP exclusive underground parking lot 3 levels below the Grand Hyatt Hotel, the air was cold and damp, mixed with the low hum of ventilation ducts, creating a suffocatingly oppressive atmosphere. The faint wail of police sirens echoed from outside, where a fleet of patrol cars had arrived. Chaos continued to spread in the lobby, while in the underground lot, the sound of hurried footsteps grew into a frantic rhythm. Alexander and I had just stepped out of the private elevator, flanked by several personal bodyguards, when the lights ahead flickered violently a few times. Clatter! A dozen black SUVs roared to life from various parking spots, their headlights blazing with blinding intensity, trapping us in the wide open space before the elevator. The doors swung open, and over 20 hired guards dressed in unmarked black tactical gear, wielding batons and titanium steel pipes, surged out with menacing aggression. Then, the door of a black Range Rover swung open, and Julian jumped out, his face covered in blood and his eyes wild with frenzy. His tuxedo was twisted and disheveled, his tie torn off, exuding a desperate hysteria. Behind him, Chloe stumbled out, her high heels broken, looking lost and trembling. Hand it over, Evelyn, Julian roared, pointing at me with a heavy riot baton, his voice echoing violently through the empty parking lot. Give me the flash drive and all the original equity agreements. Otherwise, none of you will leave here alive tonight. Julian, you've completely lost your mind. I stopped in my tracks, staring at him coldly without a hint of retreat. I have lost my mind, and it's all because of you. You bitch. Julian laughed maniacally, waving at the surrounding mercenaries. Smash everything. Destroy all the electronic devices and document bags they have on them. I'll take responsibility if anyone dies. A dozen mercenaries, their eyes gleaming with violence, charged at us brandishing their weapons. Protect Ms. Evelyn. Alexander's voice was low and steely, devoid of any emotion. The 4 towering top-tier security experts standing in front of us moved instantly. Their actions were precise, ruthless, and incredibly efficient, with the crisp sound of breaking bones and the dull thud of flesh colliding. The first few mercenaries who rushed forward screamed and crashed to the ground, their riot batons flying several meters away. The scene descended into a cold and fierce hand-to-hand combat. Seeing this, Julian grew even more frantic, seizing the chaos of the fight. A malicious glint flashed in his eyes. He suddenly grabbed an iron rod from the ground, pushed through the crowd, and swung it directly at my head. Die! He roared. Just as the iron rod hurtled toward my face, Alexander reached out, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me into his arms with steady precision. At the same time, he raised his right leg and delivered a fierce side kick to Julian's chest. Thud! Julian flew backward like a broken kite, crashing onto the hood of an SUV before bouncing to the ground. Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Chloe let out a piercing scream, crouching by the car door with her head in her hands. Trembling, steadying myself in Alexander's arms, I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a legal document freshly faxed over by the judicial authorities. Slowly, I walked over to Julian, who was struggling to get back up. Julian, did you really think you could turn this around with violence? I slapped the document onto his face, my voice icy cold. Before you arranged for these mercenaries, the judiciary had already issued a top-level arrest warrant for you. Additionally, there is something I need to remind you of right here and now. I turned my head, looking at Chloe hiding behind the car. Chloe, did you really think that by helping Julian bring me down, you could smoothly inherit the Vance family fortune? I let out a cold laugh. Half an hour ago, the final comparison results from the National Gene Bank were sent to the Judicial Department. You are not of Vance blood at all. You are just the illegitimate child your mother had from an affair back then. You conspired with Julian to forge an heir identity and embezzle family assets. On the indictment, you are listed as the principal offender. Impossible. You're lying to me. I am the eldest daughter of the Vance family. Chloe screamed hysterically, clutching her hair with both hands. Her face twisted like a demon. The mercenaries surrounding them heard the words arrest warrant and judicial authorities, then looked at Julian, who was coughing up blood on the ground. They exchanged uneasy glances, their fierceness fading instantly. Their weapons clattered to the floor one by one, and no one dared to step forward. Just then, the screech of tires came from the entrance of the parking lot. A black Maybach with special medical license plates slowly came to a stop. The door opened, and an elderly man in a deep old-fashioned suit, with an awe-inspiring gaze, slowly stepped out, supported by two special care attendants. That was the true patriarch of the Vance family, the old Vance who had been bedridden and comatose for years, Julian's biological father. The moment Julian saw the old man, his pupils shrank sharply as if struck by lightning. Father. Weren't you supposed to be unconscious in the ICU all this time? The old Vance, aided by his attendants, walked up to Julian. His eyes were filled with disappointment and icy fury. Raising a trembling hand, he brought it down in a heavy slap across Julian's face. You ungrateful wretch. The old Vance's voice was hoarse but carried an unshakable authority. Did you really think that poisoning the sedatives they gave me in the hospital would keep me unconscious forever? If Evelyn hadn't secretly arranged for a top-tier global medical team to replace your poison, I would have been dead at your hands long ago. The old Vance pulled out a sealed letter stamped with the official seal of the Judicial Notary Office and raised it high for all to see. This is my final will, notarized 3 years ago. I have officially revoked all of Julian Vance's inheritance rights and stripped him of all positions within the family. All assets and control of the Vance family are now fully in the hands of Evelyn. These words shattered Julian's last shred of hope. Julian lay sprawled on the floor, staring at his father, then at me and Alexander. The ferocity in his eyes had completely turned into boundless fear and despair. He collapsed like a pile of mud, letting out incoherent whimpers. In the distance, the sound of police sirens finally roared into the underground parking lot. Dozens of armed police officers and bailiffs rushed in, sealing off the scene completely. Floor 88 of the Vance Group headquarters, the core boardroom. Outside the glass curtain wall, dark clouds crowded the sky, overlooking the entire prosperous yet cold city. Around the dozen soft-meter-slung high-end mahogany conference table sat the 12 most influential senior directors and shareholders of the Vance Group. The atmosphere in the meeting room was suffocating, because the scandal at last night's Shari Thai Gala had gone viral. Vance Group's stock plunged 30 at the opening. Sell orders clogged the limit down, and the entire group faced an unprecedented fulfillment crisis and a run. Directors. The acting chairman's assistant slapped the table and called out loudly. Although Mr. Julian is temporarily under police investigation, he is still the nominal CEO. We must pass this emergency resolution today to annul all the rights that Evelyn obtained through divorce and have the investors inject liquidity. Otherwise, the company will go bankrupt today. Several directors whose interests had long been tied to Julian nodded and prepared to vote. Bang! The massive double-carved doors, weighing hundreds of caddies, were forced open by two black-clad bodyguards. I wore a sleek, tailored black haute couture suit and stiletto heels. My step steady and radiating an unassailable authority as I walked straight into the meeting room. Beside me stood the city's foremost legal titan, Lawyer Mark, and Alexander Ross, who held authorizations from Europe's 3 major investment banks. Let's see who dares to raise a hand. I walked to the head of the table, planted my hands on the mahogany surface, scanned every director with hawk-like eyes, and spoke with a cold, powerful voice that instantly silenced the room. Evelyn, you actually still dare to come to the group? A senior director sprang up and pointed at me in fury. Last night you exposed the group's scandal to the whole internet and caused the stock to crash, destroying Vance Group. The one destroying Vance Group isn't me, but the parasite that's been sucking its blood for years. I sneered and signaled to Lawyer Mark. Mark briskly opened his briefcase and slammed a stack of documents stamped by the Supreme Court and the Securities Regulatory Commission onto the center of the table. Directors, look closely. Mark's voice boomed, filling every corner of the room. First, Mr. Old Vance's final legal will has been notarized and authenticated by the Supreme Court. Julian Vance's inheritance rights and shares have been lawfully revoked, and Ms. Evelyn has lawfully inherited 35 of the core shares under the old man's name. Second, Mark turned to Alexander. Mr. Alexander Ross has transferred, without compensation, the 16 preferred shares of Vance Group and all claims he acquired from major creditor banks to Ms. Evelyn. Now, Ms. Evelyn personally holds up to 51 of the shares, giving her absolute controlling interest and veto power. The meeting room erupted in gasps. The directors who had supported Julian went pale, hands raised in midair recoiling as if electrocuted. 51 absolute control. How is this possible? The acting chairman slumped in his chair, eyes vacant. At that moment, the meeting room doors were pushed open again. 2 personnel from the Judicial Economic Crime Investigation Unit in black uniforms escorted and handcuffed haggard-looking Julian and Chloe. Julian's eyes were bloodshot, his clothes creased and ruined, long gone with the swagger and arrogance of the wealthy heir. When he saw me seated in the CEO's absolute chair, his whole body trembled violently. Evelyn, you vicious woman! Julian screamed hysterically at me through the guards as he struggled desperately. You set me up. You've been setting me up for 3 years. I simply took back what belongs to me, and set you where you ought to go, I said, sitting upright in the high-backed chair. Looking down at him without a trace of pity, I picked up the board's official seal representing ultimate authority and slammed down the red stamp on the resolution to remove all positions of Julian Vance and liquidate personal assets. As the largest shareholder and ultimate decision-maker of VA NCE Group, I stood, my voice ringing through the conference room. I hereby remove Julian Vance from the position of CEO effective immediately, and on behalf of the group file a $1.2 billion lawsuit against him for embezzlement and money laundering. Take him away. The officer ordered coldly. 2 guards pinned Julian's shoulders and dragged him out like a dead dog. Evelyn, do you think you've won? You think this is the end? Before being dragged out of the conference room, Julian suddenly threw his head back and laughed maniacally, his eyes bulging. a grotesque grin on his face. "You have no idea. I have people behind me. You don't even know who the real mastermind is. You can't hold on to this empire. Ha 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 ha." The arrogant, deranged laughter faded down the corridor and finally disappeared at the elevator. Silence returned to the conference room. The directors watched me tremblingly, heads bowed, and no one dared raise an objection. In the first trial courtroom of the 16th High Court, the air was so heavy it felt suffocating. Beneath the high-hanging national emblem, 5 judges of the collegiate bench sat solemnly on the bench. The prosecutor's seat, the defendant's seat, and the hearing area were all fully occupied. Journalists from hundreds of globally renowned media outlets held shorthand notebooks, their lenses and attention all focused on the defendant's seat in the center. Julian Vance and Chloe Vance, dressed in prison uniforms for the trial, made cold, crisp clanking sounds with their handcuffs and shackles. Just a few days had passed, and the once arrogant Julian had become haggard, with sunken eyes filled with bloodshot red. Beside him, Chloe was in a daze, her once refined face gone, exuding a desperate aura on the verge of collapse. "Please have the prosecutor and the plaintiff's representative present the core evidence," the chief judge said, striking the gavel, his steady voice echoing through the courtroom. Wearing a sharply tailored dark gray suit, I sat at the forefront of the plaintiff's seat, my expression cold and composed. Attorney Mark slowly stood up, walked to the display stand in the center of the courtroom, and formally submitted a several hundred-page chain of evidence list to the judge and jury. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Mark said, his voice loud and forceful, "the evidence chain we present today covers 17 felony charges committed by the defendants Julian Vance and Chloe Vance over the past 5 years, including massive money laundering, major embezzlement, forging judicial and medical documents, attempted murder, and deliberately infringing on others' personal freedom." On the large screen, the ironclad evidence we had gathered began to be displayed one by one. The recording of the conspiracy in the old mansion from Chapter 1. The plea bargain confession signed and recorded by Dr. Evans in Chapter 2. The complete set of black gold ledgers and tax evasion records provided by CFO Carter in Chapter 4. And the authoritative DNA identification documents issued by the National Gene Bank. Each piece of evidence struck like a heavy hammer, pounding fiercely on the scales of justice in the courtroom. The jury members whispered to each other, staring at the evidence on the screen, their expressions filled with shock and disgust. "Defense counsel, any objections?" the judge inquired. Julian's defense attorney, drenched in sweat, looked at the flawless, interlocking chain of evidence, his hands and feet turning cold. After stammering for a long time, he could only bow his head in defeat. The defense has no objections." A wave of immense despair instantly engulfed the defendant's seat. Chloe, who had been teetering on the edge of a mental breakdown, suddenly stood up, her handcuffs striking the iron railing with a piercing clang. "It was him, Your Honor. Julian made me do all of it." Chloe screamed hysterically, tears and snot streaming down her face, pointing at Julian beside her as she frantically turned against him. "Those fake reports, she told me to get the doctors to write them. He also made me ruin Evelyn's dress. All the money laundering accounts were set up by him. I was just a tool he used. I am innocent." "You damned bitch. Shut up." Julian completely lost control, a crimson light flashing in his eyes as he lunged at Chloe, trying to bite her with his cuffed hands. "Order. Order in the court." The judge struck the gavel heavily. Several bailiffs rushed forward, firmly holding down the two who were tearing at each other, forcing them back into their seats. The once high and mighty siblings from a wealthy family were now in the highest court, biting and exposing each other like mad dogs, their disgraceful display drawing bursts of contemptuous laughter from the hearing area. I watched this scene coldly, my heart as calm as still water. Half an hour later, the collegial panel adjourned. The judge stood up again and read out the final verdict. "The court hereby sentences the defendant, Julian Vance, for aggravated money laundering, embezzlement, attempted murder, and forgery of official documents. Multiple offenses are combined, resulting in a sentence of life imprisonment, deprivation of political rights for life, a staggering fine of $1.5 billion, and the confiscation and liquidation of all assets under his name. The defendant, Chloe Vance, is sentenced to 22 years in prison for massive fraud and asset embezzlement, with all illegal gains confiscated. Bang, the gavel fell, producing a deafening sound, drawing a definitive end to this criminal saga. Julian collapsed at the defendant's table, his eyes vacant, staring at the ceiling, his face ashen like a corpse. Chloe let out a desperate wail as the bailiffs dragged her out of the courtroom like a dead dog. I smoothed my suit jacket, stood up gracefully, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Under the flashing lights of countless media cameras, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse onto me, washing away the cold and humiliation completely. But just as I stepped out of the courthouse and was about to board my car, my private encrypted phone vibrated softly. A message appeared on the screen from an unknown encrypted number. Ms. Evelyn, congratulations on eliminating 2 reckless fools. At 3 p.m. tomorrow, at the Old Port Warehouse No. 7, I have prepared a true coronation for you. Your old friend behind the curtain. I stared at the words on the screen, a playful yet cold smile curling at the corner of my mouth. The mastermind behind the curtain, as Julian had called him, had finally lost patience and revealed his tale. On the freshly renovated central plaza of the Vance family estate, sunlight bathed the green lawns. Hundreds of top media cameras and global live broadcast rigs had already been set up. A grand, solemn main stage for the press conference had been erected in the center of the plaza, and the huge backdrop bore the new Vance Group emblem and the deep gold words New Era Reorganization. City dignitaries from politics and business, media titans, and senior executives from major financial institutions were all in attendance. An hour before the conference officially began, I drove alone, as agreed, to Warehouse No. 7 at the Old Harbor. The real opponent who had tried to manipulate everything from behind the scenes, the secret financial tycoon who had attempted to swallow Vance Group's overseas non-performing assets at fire sale prices, was sitting on a sofa in the middle of the warehouse waiting for me. Ms. Evelyn, you're bold, really daring to come alone, he said, puffing a cigar, his gaze cold and arrogant. I said nothing unnecessary. I tossed a court bailiff and financial regulator signed order freezing assets and launching an antitrust investigation at his feet. Did you think hiding behind Julian and Chloe to sow discord and run a bribery network would keep you from being found out? I looked at him coldly. 3 hours before you texted me, Alexander's team took full control of your core overseas funding chain, and all your shell companies have been liquidated. What you were offering me wasn't a coronation. It was your own dead end. His face changed, and in a panic he pulled out his phone only to hear the electronic notification that his overseas accounts had been lawfully frozen. He slumped onto the sofa, utterly ashen. I turned and walked out of the dark warehouse without looking back, heading toward my coronation scene. At 3 in the afternoon, applause and cheers rose across the estate plaza. I wore a black haute couture strapless gown with a neat matching blazer and the deep-sea black pearl necklace my mother left behind, newly polished. As the sole supreme leader and ruler of the Vance Group, I stepped onto the center of the main stage. Alexander stood to the side of the stage and gave me a deep, respectful look. Old Vance sat in the front row VIP seat, his eyes full of pride and awe. I stood at the microphone, looking down at the hundreds of journalists and guests below. My voice was calm, clear, and powerfully penetrating. 3 weeks ago, in this family's study, someone tried to tear my life apart with a forged diagnosis, and even attempted to publicly auction me at a starting price of $1 at a banquet, mocking me as the worthless wife. Media lights flashed below, and tens of millions of viewers across the network held their breath. Today I stand here not to denounce the past but to declare the beginning of a new era. I raised my hand and pointed to a display table at the side of the stage. Staff opened the black wooden box that had once symbolized a privation and humiliation, and publicly burned every copy of the old unjust agreements. The flames consumed the shadows of the past, and the ashes scattered on the estate's sunlit grounds. The Vance Group is now fully reorganized. All corruption, black money, and malice will be thoroughly purged. My gaze was sharp as a blade as I looked straight into the cameras. Those who tried to send me to hell are now watching me from the depths of that hell. This empire is ruled by me. Thunderous applause exploded across the estate plaza, reverberating for a long time. At that moment, several hundred kilometers away in the high-security prison, Julian, wearing prison stripes, stared fixedly at the television screen on the wall, watching me high above and lauded by thousands. He trembled all over, tears of regret and despair welling in his eyes. Yet he could only spend the rest of his life within the endless iron bars. I stood at the center of a stage where spotlight and sunlight intertwined, chin lifted slightly, ready to embrace the supreme glory that belonged to me.